You're listening to the HR Mixtape, a podcast for leaders who want to understand people, strengthen culture, and navigate change with clarity. Today's conversation starts now.
Joining me today is Nik Daruwala, Vice President of Sales at Checkr. He brings 21 years of business-to-business technology sales experience, including more than 14 years in senior leadership roles where he built and scaled people teams at Microsoft, Gartner, and SurveyMonkey. Nik, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me on the podcast today. We are at the SHRM 2026 Annual Conference Expo inside the Checkr booth. So glad to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I'm really excited about this topic, and we're going to start with this. How has the fundamental nature of enterprise hiring changed over your career?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I have been at this for a little bit, almost 24 years and counting in different roles, not only in technology sales, but I would say it depends and varies on the industry and type. We are seeing, I think, a lot on global processes happening. So it started all local and hiring, but I think there are sometimes some competitive advantages to look at global opportunities to hire folks. I think there was always this demand previously that you had to meet the person in person. Now, I think because the last couple of years we got used to hiring remotely, so I think we're becoming more comfortable with that, although there are some implications of that, which we might get to today. I think the volume of hiring has gone crazy. If you think about the platforms that exist out there, LinkedIn, Indeed, number of AI tools out now, so there's this huge amount of supply that are out too, and it's very easy to apply for a job. So I think we democratized hiring for the candidate. We made it much more easy to at least search and look for a job. And again, there's also some implication for that volume that comes in to make sure we hire the right types of candidates. I think there's some new emerging technologies as we will try and limit the amount of times we say AI on this call, but we might need to talk about it a little bit. But how AI has, I think, changed a lot of the hiring behaviors. I think there's pluses and minuses and advantages to that for both the candidate as well as for the recruiting teams and talent operations teams that are out there.
Yeah. So you talked about AI, which again, I don't think we're gonna try to limit as much as we can, but that's kind of like the topic on the floor. But I don't think it's the only thing that CHROs are anxious about right now. I think they have a lot on their plate. So when it comes to hiring, what are you seeing as kind of their top priorities or their top anxiety drivers?
I think right now we've seen, at least in our business, a huge amount of inbound demand and interest to solve a problem around making sure that the candidates they're seeing throughout the hiring funnel are actually who they say they are. So I think there's some concern from CHROs. Are they hiring the wrong person downstream? And what's the business impact of that? Sometimes we don't realize sometimes, especially if you're working, as an example, if your end customer or your person you're working with is in a manages vulnerable populations, like that's a huge concern to get that hiring wrong. They're introducing risk into the business, and I think that keeps a lot of CHROs awake at night because that was a threat surface they didn't need to worry about. It was mainly all cyber focused, but we're seeing more and more, I think, creative ways that worksters are trying to get into penetrate companies, gather information, potentially do nefarious things. And it was not obvious, I think, to a lot of people that the CHROs might have to play an outsized role in partnering up with their IT counterparts, the technology counterparts, to go and prevent that. And I think if you're a small business and you're a very small company, it's equally a problem because that if you run a small business, you typically you wear multiple hats. So you need, I think solutions, or you rely a lot on the technology providers to help prevent something with that.
Yeah.
Risk that might add to your business.
Yeah, only 31% of CHROs have confidence in that ability to prevent hiring fraud. And I find that really fascinating, especially as we look at all of the tools that are available for the candidate now to help them ace interviews. I recently saw something that was basically like an AI version of yourself is coming and doing the interview and answering the questions. That's got to be really scary for CHROs.
It is. And I think it's just, unfortunately, just getting started. I think some industries are maybe less immune because you maybe do more in-person hiring, but equally, I think there's fraud that they might not realize it might already be in their company. But if you just take your question directly, I think there's a threat from deepfakes. There's synthetic IDs that are being created. There's AI-generated credentialing that's happening right now. And these are all new challenges I don't think the CHRO had to worry about. We hear a lot from our customers and CHROs that there was a non-issue at the start of 2025, that as AI and the large language models have become more and more sophisticated, it has become the tooling and power to go and create fraud has become a lot harder to go and navigate and manage. So a lot of fraud. It's a new challenge for CHROs, and it's again not an area I think they typically had to proactively think about worrying about. They're often very reactive to go and solve this issue, but I think smart CHROs are getting ahead of this. They're partnering up with their technology counterparts, the chief information security officers, if that role exists, or at least highlighting to the C-suite if the role doesn't exist within an organization, especially if small or medium-sized companies, they have less resources on the technology side, and potentially then they need to rely a lot on the vendor to help guide them to come and prevent this risk that's entering their hiring funnels.
Yeah, I recently just attended a conference and they talked about NCIDs, non-consensual intimate deepfakes. And I was like, wow, as an HR person, having to pay attention to something like that was not on the bingo card for the year.
No.
So how many, executives or enterprise leaders are actually prepared to handle hiring fraud? So there's the awareness piece, right? We got that. But now that let's say we catch somebody, how prepared are they to handle that situation?
I think our early read that most are not yet, but I think they're becoming more and more aware. And it's usually a reactive state. It's very similar to what we saw in the early days of cyber, where until there was a cyber incident, then people react and take action and go and look at evaluate vendors in the market and find a solution to close the gap. And I think it's very similar for what we're seeing with some of these deep fakes and frauds. I think until you had your first one, you might not want to think this is a top priority. It maybe is like bottom of the list of all the to-dos that you're required to do as a senior HR leader. And suddenly when you have your first one, or there's an impact to your business or revenue or your customers, and it was the result of someone that's entered the organization that is not who they say are, or it's fraudulent, that's usually when we see sort of the impetus to change. But I think sophisticated HR leaders, and I think it's becoming more and more of a topic. I mean, at the time of this recording, if you just see the power of some of these large language models, the U.S. government stopped one of the largest manufacturers of large language models, Anthropic, from releasing their latest model because it was so powerful. So the U.S. government stepped in to stop export control on one of the largest, most component technology providers that are out there in Anthropic from releasing their latest model, just to show the power of these platforms. And they want to do some checks and balances before they go on releasing. So the power is being democratized, and I think if you have nefarious intent, it's really worrisome. But again, I think there are companies out there that can help. We're one of them. They're doing a lot of work and are deeply thinking about tackling this problem because we see it more and more from all adults.
Where do you typically see the fraud or the deepfakes or the use of AI resumes inside of that pipeline, that talent pipeline? Is it right at the beginning, or is there people that are getting all the way to the point where they're starting and you're like, oh, wow, you don't have any of the skills you said you had?
Yeah. We see it everywhere. So we see it at the application to just applying for the job. We see it at the interview level. So there's now deep fakes, as you mentioned and referenced earlier. You could have an avatar essentially of a human, but actually it's a bad actor or someone faking who they represent on a Zoom call. If you're doing a remote screen, when you actually let's say you actually get the job, we're seeing it in the background check process as well. And even post-hire, we see an ability, if you don't continuously monitor the identity of the folks that are working for you, there's risk that you introduce to your organization.
Yeah. What have you said to the person who's like, yeah, okay, I understand all of this, but have you seen the recs that I have to fill this week? And I'm being told I need to fill them in 2 weeks. So hurry up and get through. I can't worry about this.
Yeah, no, it's totally fair. I mean, it's a fair demand. I think that the business places on the talent and recruiting leave. It's always do more with less. If you look at all the funding of resources and where they're adding headcount, the HR and TA teams are usually the last to ever get requisitions to hire more recruiters. And I think there are solutions out there like us where you don't need to make that trade-off. I think the best hiring programs give you the confidence to have that throughput and speed, but you don't need to compromise on compliance or safety. And you should have technology automate a lot of that low value manual work, but still maintain a high bar for accuracy and compliance with your hiring standards. So I think there should be risk controls embedded into the process. And I think there's always, we obsess over trying to help our customers remove friction from the hiring process. So we try and obsess over that last mile of the hiring process that sometimes, and not the most fun part, which is, I'm going to offer someone the job, and then they've got to go through the background check as an example. And I think there's other technology providers out there as well that are trying to tackle the same sort of funnel channels right now. But at least in our world, we don't see a need where you need to have a compromise and you get to have your cake anyway. You both get the speed as well as the safety and compliance. And I think all technology providers in the HR tech ecosystem should have that as a North Star goal.
Yeah. As Checkr being, a premier background screening company, and I'm going to use that very smallly because that does not do justice in describing Checkr's totality.
Yeah.
What is the thing that you are consistently solving as a pain point for businesses when you come in and you talk about the solutions and some of the things we've talked about already?
So I think, if I try and I'll try and be as unbiased as I can, but I think share with your audience and your viewers and your listeners, we don't just do background checks. I think we think about just like, how can we be a data platform for safe and fair decisions? And that's a lot of things in life. What many people don't realize is that they actually interact with our product indirectly. So if you've ever taken an Uber or a Lyft, or if you've ever had delivery from DoorDash or Instacart, that stranger that we just assume we trust, for many, many years, we have been verified by Checkr. So we are actually the background check provider for many of these companies that we just trust and take for granted every day of the week. And we think that, I think the specific pain point that we solve is a couple of things. There's the candidate side. So we've spent lots and lots of time on looking at different worker types, and we understand as everyone that needs a mobile first experience, or generationally, the younger generations, if you're trying to staff someone for a front of house operations, you try and send a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old an email. They're like, what's that? But, they can quickly, do a background check on their mobile or their phone, and we meet them where they are. So there's that aspect. So there's the candidate aspect, which we aim just to like our candidates and have a beautiful UI for them to enter, all the way through to the user management of actually using the platform. And we've spent a lot of time with HR leaders, talent operations folks, recruiting folks, and truly try and remove friction from their day. So everything that's manual in the day, we just try and automate. We're a technology first company. We were the first API in the background check industry 12 years ago, and we've continued to kind of innovate. We're doing that with fraud as an example right now. And I think we fundamentally believe that trust should be a competitive advantage, and that you should be able to have and develop that trust at speed. So we think about speed. We also think about making sure it's incredibly compliant. So we just don't want to give you the fastest background check. We want to make sure it's no underreporting, highly compliant.
You mentioned speed, and it kind of leads me to my next question. When I think about hiring at scale, you have organizations that have, consistent, maybe knowledge worker hiring, replacements, that kind of stuff. But you also have, organizations that do mass seasonal hiring, and they got to really quickly do all the background checks. How do they prioritize this process, and what should be coming first and what shouldn't, as they're trying to make sure that they're getting accurate information, but they're not slowing down the pipeline like we talked about earlier?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of areas I think that you can do to kind of prevent some of the slowdown maybe that happens later in the funnel. So I think they should be checking identities. They should be constantly scanning code. And again, it's the business dependent. There should be automation, workflow efficiency. It should be a really simple, easy to use candidate experience. Because when you spend a lot of time with the folks that are applying for jobs, sometimes they just, they're trying to make ends meet, and they want the first job that's the easiest to start. They want to start today, working where they want, start earning income, They sometimes have to work 2 and 3 jobs to support their families, and they need to have that first job. So it's almost like a competitive advantage if you can have a frictionless hiring process from application through to onboarding and start, and making sure like hiring teams kind of look at that and seeing are there micro improvements that we can make in that hiring flow. Take our piece of it, the last mile of it, the background check process, like how can we make that frictionless? And that's what we obsess over, trying to ensure we make it as seamless and frictionless as possible.
Yeah. All right. So looking forward, let's go 2 to 3 years. I feel like asking the question about what's going to happen 5 years from now is probably pretty unrealistic. Yeah. 2 years from now, you talked a little bit about the younger generations and their modes of communication. And thinking in my head, like there could be a world where you are applying and doing this entire process through an Instagram message. How is Checkr thinking about the next 2 years, 3 years? What's going to be different in the hiring space?
Yeah, we're constantly, I think, thinking and looking ahead. We have a wide range of customers. We have 140,000 customers now that use our from single, very small business owner all the way through to Fortune 500 and everything in between. We believe that I think a lot of what will happen is AI will continue to automate a lot of the administrative tasks, which I think for anyone in a TA role or a recruiting role or an HR leader, it's some of the most non-obvious areas to go and automate. We just do things and we expect things. And we talk to a lot of customers who in 2026 are still doing so much manual work. For example, like they're manually adjudicating every single record that gets flagged. And there's now ways, for example, like we have an ability to automate a lot of that. And I think that is the ability, like it will never actually make the hiring decision. I don't believe that will happen. I still think humans should finally make the judgment call on that. But I think a lot of the administrative costs of the role should be that. Because ultimately, hiring's, a highly compliant industry. It's a very, very important thing to get right. And if you can fully outsource that to AI, I think one of the most painful parts of being a hiring manager, even for myself, hiring a lot of people, is just sourcing really good talent. I think a lot of the talent's going to be sourced through AI. I think you'll be able to personalize outreach to top talent that you want to proactively go and find, or if you want to build a bench of talent, you're going to be able to use AI to write very thoughtful messages to prospective people that you want to bring into your company that you go work for. And it's a very manual process right now. If you do it, you have to manually go look for that talent. You've got to find the criteria. You've got to, if you use LinkedIn Recruiter as an example, like you've got to go look through LinkedIn Recruiter, settle your filters. I think a lot of that's going to be automated. And you're going to be able to ask AI, say, I'm hiring for a role in Dallas. Please find me the top talent that meet my criteria. This is my criteria. Go find me the candidates, write the outreach, send them the various methods of communication you want to. And I think it's all going to be automated. I also think that your verification and trust is going to be super important. And as we think about just the increasing use of AI and the fraud that continues to take place, I think we will see an increasing need to have really good verification and trust signals that are happening. And I think at the end of the day, I think whether we like it or not, I think there'll be need to have this continuous monitoring that happens. It can feel a little bit big brotherish at times, but I think making sure that we adopt the right people in our organization, who they say constantly monitor them to make sure that their identities and their driving records, their any other records that might be relevant to their chapter are still relevant to this.
Nik, this was such a great conversation, and it's really cool hearing from somebody who's on kind of the sales side of HR tech in this space about what you're seeing, because you get to have all these kind of tough conversations with people as you go in and try to sell Checkr to them. So you have a really different perspective, I think, than I've heard from some other people. So I appreciate you sitting down and chatting with me.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope it was helpful. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for tuning in to the HR Mixtape. Like, share, review, and subscribe to support the show and help more people discover these conversations. Until next time, keep the conversation going.